In the depths of space, where civilizations rise and fall like distant stars, there exists a universal truth that every advanced species learns: never underestimate the primitive. The Zephyrian Empire had ruled the galaxy for 3 millennia, their crystalline technology and superior intellect crushing any resistance with elegant precision. They viewed humans as nothing more than ambitious insects, scurrying across their backwater planet with crude metal ships and chemical propulsion. But, on the morning when Admiral Vextar and his officers stood on the observation deck of their flagship, watching human vessels approach their impenetrable fortress world, something extraordinary was about to unfold. The officers laughed at the sight of the small, ungainly human fleet. Their advanced helmets, made from the finest Zephyrian crystal composites, displayed tactical readouts that confirmed their overwhelming superiority. They had no idea that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology, their numbers, or even their determination. It was something far more dangerous: their absolute refusal to accept the impossible. And, in the next few hours, those same officers would learn that when humans are pushed to their breaking point, they don't just fight back, they rewrite the very laws of physics themselves. What happened next would shake the foundations of the galaxy and prove that sometimes, the most primitive species can teach the most advanced civilizations a lesson in humility. This is the story of how humanity's darkest hour became the moment that changed everything, and why alien officers who once laughed from above found their certainty shattered like glass. The bridge of the Zephyrian flagship Eternal Dominion hummed with the quiet confidence of absolute superiority. Admiral Vextar stood before the massive viewing port, his crystalline exoskeleton catching the light from distant stars as he observed the approaching human fleet. Behind him, his officers moved with the fluid grace typical of their species, their elongated forms perfectly adapted for the low-gravity environments of their crystal cities. 27 vessels, reported Commander Euthera, her voice carrying the melodic tones that marked her as nobility among the Zephyrians. Primitive chemical propulsion systems. Hull composition appears to be basic steel alloys with some ceramic plating. Their largest vessel measures barely 800 meters in length. A soft chiming filled the air as the other officers expressed their amusement. Among Zephyrians, laughter was not the crude sound humans made, but rather a harmonic resonance that created beautiful crystalline patterns in the air around them. Admiral Vextar's own amusement joined the chorus, creating complex geometric forms that danced near the ceiling of the bridge. 800 meters, he repeated, turning to face his staff. His helmet, a masterwork of Zephyrian engineering that interfaced directly with his nervous system, displayed tactical information with perfect clarity. My personal shuttle is nearly that size. What intelligence do we have on their weaponry? Sub-Commander Keldos stepped forward, his young face eager to impress his superiors. Our sensors detect primitive kinetic projectile systems, Admiral. Chemical explosive warheads. Some form of directed energy weapons, though they appear to operate on simple laser principles. Nothing that could penetrate even our secondary shielding. And their defensive capabilities? Vextar asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer would be equally unimpressive. Negligible, sir. They appear to rely on thick armor plating and some form of electromagnetic field generation. Our analysis indicates their shields would fail within seconds of contact with our weakest weapons. The Admiral's helmet displayed a three-dimensional tactical overview of the approaching human fleet. The vessels moved in what humans probably considered a battle formation, but, to Zephyrian eyes, it looked more like the random movement of space debris. Their ships lacked the elegant curves and crystalline beauty of Zephyrian design, instead appearing as brutal, angular constructs that seemed to have been assembled from spare parts. I confess, I'm puzzled by their approach, Vextar mused, his forearms clasped behind his back in a gesture of contemplation. Our intelligence reports indicate humans are not typically suicidal. Yet here they come, approaching Zirian Prime itself. Surely they must understand this as a fortress world? Commander Euthera consulted her own tactical display. Perhaps they believe their numbers will compensate for their technological inferiority? Though 27 vessels against our planetary defense grid seems optimistic. The bridge fell silent except for the gentle humming of the ship's systems and the soft crystalline chimes of officer communications. Below them, Zirian Prime stretched out like a jewel against the black of space. The planet's surface was covered in the geometric patterns of Zephyrian cities, their crystal spires reaching toward the stars like frozen music. Orbital defense platforms surrounded the world in perfect mathematical arrangements, each one capable of destroying entire fleets. "Sir," Communications Officer Relfin announced, "we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet. Audio only." "Let's hear what these primitives have to say," Vextar replied, settling into his command chair with obvious amusement. The voice that emerged from the communications system was harsh and guttural compared to Zephyrian speech patterns, but the universal translator handled the crude human language without difficulty. "This is Admiral Sarah Chun of the Earth Defense Force, commanding the fleet Indomitable. I'm transmitting on all frequencies to ensure you receive this message clearly. We know you can understand us." Vextar exchanged glances with his officers. The humans sounded remarkably calm for someone facing certain annihilation. "You have enslaved 17 human colonies," the voice continued. "You have strip-mined our worlds, taken our people for experimentation, and treated humanity as nothing more than an inconvenience to be managed. We've come to deliver a message." "Oh, this should be interesting," Subcommander Kaldos whispered to his companion, his helmet's display showing readings that indicated elevated amusement levels among the bridge crew. "We know you think we're primitive," Admiral Chen's voice said, and there was something in her tone that made Vextar lean forward slightly. "We know you think our technology is laughably inferior to yours. We know you believe this confrontation will end with our complete destruction within minutes of engagement." The human paused, and, in that silence, something shifted on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion. It was subtle at first, just a slight change in the quality of the light passing through the viewing port, a barely perceptible alteration in the harmonic patterns generated by the ship's systems. "You're absolutely right about all of that," Chen continued. "Your technology is thousands of years ahead of ours. Your weapons could vaporize our entire fleet without taxing your power systems. Your shields could withstand everything we can throw at you for decades. By every reasonable measure, this should be a massacre." Vextar found himself genuinely curious about where this was leading. In his 3 centuries of military service, he had never encountered an enemy commander who openly acknowledged their own hopeless situation with such apparent calm. "But here's the thing about humans that your intelligence reports probably missed," Chen said, and now there was definitely something different in her voice. "When we know we can't win, when every rational calculation says we should surrender, when the smart thing to do is run away and live to fight another day, that's exactly when we become most dangerous." The first sign that something was wrong came from the sensor stations. Ensign Mortex, monitoring long-range scanners, suddenly straightened in his chair with obvious confusion. "Admiral," he said carefully, "I'm detecting some unusual readings from the human fleet." "Define unusual," Vextar replied, though his attention remained focused on the human transmission. "Their energy signatures are fluctuating, sir. The electromagnetic output from their ships is increasing exponentially, but not in any pattern I recognize. It's as if their power plants are overloading, but in a controlled manner." Chen's voice continued from the speakers. "See, we figured out something about your crystal technology. All that beautiful, efficient, perfect engineering has one tiny weakness. It's designed to handle known forms of energy, to interact with familiar electromagnetic spectra, to respond to predictable forms of attack." Vextar's amusement was beginning to fade, replaced by the first stirrings of unease. His helmet's sensors were now detecting the same anomalous readings that had caught his ensign's attention. The human ships were indeed doing something unprecedented with their power systems. "But what happens," Chen asked, her voice now carrying an edge of grim satisfaction, "when you hit it with something completely outside its operational parameters? Something so crude and primitive that your perfect technology doesn't even have protocols for dealing with it?" The tactical display in Vextar's helmet suddenly lit up with warning indicators. The human fleet's energy output had increased by over 300% in the last 30 seconds, and the emission spectrum was unlike anything in Zephyrian databases. "Engineering," Vextar called out, no longer amused. "What are they doing to their ships?" Chief Engineer Zalratha's response carried tones of confusion and growing concern. "Unknown, Admiral. Our sensors indicate they're channeling massive amounts of energy through their hull plating, but the frequencies are chaotic. Random. It's as if they're turning their entire vessels into crude electromagnetic pulse generators. Admiral Chen, Vexstar said, opening a channel to the human fleet, "What exactly do you think you can accomplish with such primitive tactics?" The response came immediately, and, this time Chen's voice carried what humans called laughter. It was an ugly sound to Zephyrian ears, harsh and primal. "We're about to find out," she said. "You see, Admiral, we've learned something interesting about your species over the years. You've become so dependent on your technology, so integrated with it, that you've forgotten what it's like to think without it." The human ships began to move, not in any formation that made tactical sense, but spreading out in a seemingly random pattern. Their energy signatures continued to climb, and Vexstar's sensors began registering interference across multiple spectra. "Those helmets of yours," Chen continued, "they're beautiful pieces of technology. Direct neural interface, quantum processing, instantaneous tactical analysis. They make you practically superhuman in combat situations. But they're also crystals, aren't they? Very sophisticated crystals, but crystals nonetheless." A chill ran through Vexstar's four-chambered heart as he began to understand what the human was suggesting. Crystals, even Zephyrian crystals, had resonant frequencies. They could be shattered by the right kind of vibration, disrupted by the proper electromagnetic pulse. "All units," he commanded, his voice cutting across the bridge communications, "raise shields to maximum. Prepare for unconventional attack patterns." But, even as he gave the orders, Vexstar knew it might be too late. The humans weren't trying to destroy Zephyrian ships with their crude tactics. They were trying to destroy something far more vulnerable, the technology that Zephyrians couldn't live without. The first human ship reached optimal position and began to pulse with chaotic energy. The effect on nearby Zephyrian vessels was immediate and catastrophic. Bridge officers screamed as their neural interface helmets began to vibrate, the carefully tuned crystals responding to frequencies they had never been designed to encounter. On the observation deck of the Eternal Dominion, Admiral Vexstar watched in growing horror as the elegant formation of his fleet began to dissolve into chaos. Ships drifted out of position as their officers clutched at malfunctioning helmets, their perfect technology turned against them by humanity's most primitive weapon, brute force applied in completely unexpected ways. "Impossible," he whispered, but, even as he spoke, he could feel his own helmet beginning to vibrate against his skull. The human fleet was still approaching, their crude ships pulsing with chaotic energy like some kind of electromagnetic storm. And, in that moment, Admiral Vexstar realized that all his superiority, all his advanced technology, all his centuries of military experience meant nothing against an enemy that refused to play by the rules of civilized warfare. The humans weren't trying to defeat the Zephyrians through superior tactics or advanced weapons. They were planning to win by being too primitive, too crude, too impossibly reckless for Zephyrian technology to handle. As his helmet began to crack, sending sharp pain through his neural interfaces, Vexstar understood that this battle would not go as anyone had expected. The humans had found a way to turn their greatest weakness into the galaxy's most terrifying weapon, unpredictability. The pain was unlike anything in Admiral Vexstar's extensive military experience. As his neural interface helmet cracked, sending jagged spikes of feedback through his consciousness, he watched his perfectly ordered bridge descend into chaos. Officers stumbled blindly as their helmets malfunctioned, their graceful movements reduced to clumsy fumbling as centuries of technological dependence worked against them. "Emergency protocols," Vexstar managed to gasp, fighting through the neural static that clouded his thoughts. "Disconnect all personal interface systems. Switch to manual controls." But, switching to manual controls was easier ordered than accomplished. Zephyrian technology had evolved over millennia to be seamlessly integrated with their neural systems. Ships, weapons, even basic life support were designed to be operated through thought alone. Without their helmet interfaces, his officers were like humans trying to perform surgery while wearing thick gloves. Commander Euthera pulled her helmet off with a sharp crack, revealing the delicate crystalline implants that studded her elongated skull. Blood seeped from several connection points, but her expression showed relief at being freed from the chaotic feedback. "Sir," she reported, her voice strained but functional, "long-range communications are down across the fleet. The electromagnetic interference from the human ships is disrupting our quantum entanglement networks. What about the planetary defense grid? Vexstar asked, finally, succeeding in removing his own helmet. The absence of the constant data flow felt like suddenly going blind and deaf simultaneously. Unknown, sir. We've lost our direct interface with Zirian Prime's command systems. Through the viewing port, the human fleet continued its approach, their ships now pulsing with chaotic energy in an almost hypnotic rhythm. What had initially seemed like crude, desperate tactics now appeared far more calculated. The humans had studied their enemy and found the one weakness that Zephyrian superiority couldn't overcome, their own perfection. Sir, Sub-Commander Keldos called out from the weapons station, struggling with manual controls that hadn't been designed for direct manipulation. I'm attempting to target the lead human vessels, but our targeting systems keep losing lock. The electromagnetic interference is disrupting our quantum calculations. Vexstar moved to the manual tactical display, a crude backup system that most Zephyrian officers had never been trained to use effectively. The holographic projection showed the positions of both fleets, but, without the sophisticated analysis normally provided by their helmet systems, reading the tactical situation was like trying to navigate by candlelight after a lifetime of electric illumination. The human formation made more sense now. Rather than a random scatter pattern, their ships had arranged themselves to create overlapping fields of electromagnetic chaos. Each vessel was generating its own unique frequency signature, and, together they created a storm of interference that was systematically destroying Zephyrian technological advantages. They planned this, Vexstar realized aloud. This wasn't desperation. This was strategy. The first human ship to enter weapons range was a battered-looking vessel that the tactical display identified as a heavy cruiser. Its hull was scarred and patched, clearly having seen extensive combat, but it moved with purpose toward the nearest Zephyrian destroyer. Helm, Vexstar ordered, bring us around to support the crystal wind. We can't let them engage our ships individually. But, the helm officer, struggling with manual controls after a lifetime of neural interface piloting, was slow to respond. The Zephyrian destroyer found itself facing the human cruiser alone, and what happened next defied every tactical doctrine in Zephyrian military history. The human ship didn't attempt to match the destroyer's elegant maneuvers or engage in the ritualized dance of advanced space combat. Instead, it simply accelerated directly toward the Zephyrian vessel while continuing to pulse with chaotic electromagnetic energy. As it approached, the destroyer's shields flickered and failed, its defensive systems unable to maintain coherence in the face of the random frequency assault. They're going to ram, Commander Euthera observed with disbelief. They actually intend to physically collide with our ship. The Crystal Wind attempted evasive maneuvers, but, without neural interface precision, the destroyer's movements were clumsy compared to its usual graceful agility. The human cruiser, apparently unconcerned with its own survival, slammed into the destroyer's port side with the force of a small asteroid. The explosion lit up space with primitive chemical fire, completely unlike the clean energy releases of advanced weapons. Both ships were destroyed instantly, but the psychological impact on the Zephyrian fleet was devastating. In 3 millennia of galactic dominance, no enemy had ever resorted to such crude, brutal tactics. Admiral, Communications Officer Rel Finn reported, his voice shaking, we're receiving another transmission from the human fleet. Let's hear it, Vexstar replied grimly. Admiral Chen's voice emerged from the speakers again, but now it carried an edge of savage satisfaction. I hope you're beginning to understand, Admiral. We didn't come here to win a conventional battle. We came here to teach you something about humanity that your intelligence reports missed. Another human ship was accelerating toward a Zephyrian cruiser, its hull glowing with the heat of overcharged systems. The Zephyrian vessel tried to evade, but its movements were hampered by malfunctioning systems and the crew's unfamiliarity with manual controls. When humans are faced with impossible odds, Chen continued, we don't calculate probabilities or analyze tactical options. We do whatever it takes to hurt our enemies, even if it means destroying ourselves in the process. Especially if it means destroying ourselves in the process. The second ramming attack succeeded even more spectacularly than the first. The human ship's overloaded power plant detonated just as it made contact with the Zephyrian cruiser, creating a massive electromagnetic pulse that disabled 3 nearby vessels and sent shockwaves through the Zephyrian formation.
"This is madness," Subcommander Kaldos whispered. "They're committing suicide."
"No," Vexstar corrected, beginning to understand the human strategy with growing horror.
"They're committing murder-suicide. And they're doing it efficiently." The tactical display showed the human fleet reorganizing for another wave of attacks.
Several ships had broken off from the main group and were approaching Zephyrian vessels from different angles, each one pulsing with the chaotic energy that was proving so effective against crystalline technology. "Sir," Commander Euthera reported, "I'm receiving status updates from our remaining ships. Fleet-wide casualties are approaching 15%, and most of our vessels report significant systems failures. The electromagnetic interference is cascading through our networks, causing failures in systems that aren't even directly exposed." Vexstar studied the tactical situation with growing unease. The human fleet was rapidly diminishing, but each loss inflicted disproportionate damage on Zephyrian forces.
At this rate, the humans might actually succeed in crippling the entire fleet through sheer brutality.
"What about the planetary defense grid?" he asked.
"Can we coordinate with Zirian Prime's orbital platforms?"
"Still attempting to establish communication, sir.
The quantum entanglement networks are completely disrupted across this entire system." The implications were staggering.
Zirian Prime was supposed to be the most heavily defended world in Zephyrian space, protected by orbital weapons platforms that could destroy entire invasion fleets. But those platforms relied on instantaneous quantum communication for coordination, and the human electromagnetic storm was making such coordination impossible. "Sir," the helm officer called out, "the humans are changing tactics. Several of their ships are moving toward the planet itself." Vexstar turned his attention back to the tactical display. A group of human vessels had broken away from the main engagement and were accelerating toward Zirian Prime. Their trajectory would take them directly through the orbital defense grid, but, given the communications disruption, the automated platforms might not be able to coordinate an effective response.
"They're not just trying to destroy our fleet," he realized. "They're going after the planet itself."
The idea was so audacious, so completely contrary to civilized warfare, that it took several seconds for the full implications to sink in. Zirian Prime was home to billions of Zephyrians, the cultural and technological heart of their entire civilization. No rational enemy would attempt a direct assault on such a heavily defended world. But, then, again, rationality didn't seem to be a factor in human tactical planning. "Admiral," Shen's voice returned to the communications channel, "I want you to understand what's about to happen.
In approximately 18 minutes, 7 of our ships will enter your planet's atmosphere.
Each one is carrying a cargo hold full of spent nuclear fuel rods from our oldest reactors.
Not weapons, you understand. Just waste products that we've been storing for centuries."
Vexstar felt his blood freeze in his arteries. Nuclear materials, even spent fuel, would be catastrophically toxic to Zephyrian physiology. Their advanced biology, evolved in the clean environment of crystal cities, had no natural resistance to radioactive contamination. "When those ships crash into your surface," Chen continued, "they won't just create explosions. They'll create radioactive dead zones that will persist for thousands of years. Your beautiful crystal cities will become uninhabitable monuments to your own arrogance." "You're bluffing," Vexstar transmitted back, though his voice carried no conviction.
"No civilized species would contaminate an entire world."
Chen's laughter returned, that harsh, primitive sound that seemed to mock everything Zephyrian civilization represented.
"Admiral, I don't think you understand yet.
We're not a civilized species.
We're humans.
And, when you threaten our colonies, our families, our entire way of life, we become the most dangerous thing in the galaxy, desperate people with nothing left to lose."
The tactical display showed the human ships approaching Zirian Prime's orbital defense perimeter.
The automated platforms were beginning to respond, their massive weapons charging, but, without coordinated targeting, their effectiveness would be severely reduced. "Even if you stop some of our ships," Chen added, "you only need to miss one. Just one radioactive payload reaching your surface, and Zirian Prime becomes uninhabitable for the next 10,000 years. Are you willing to take that risk?" For the first time in his centuries of military service, Admiral Vextar found himself facing an enemy that couldn't be reasoned with, couldn't be defeated through superior technology, and couldn't be deterred by the threat of mutual destruction. The humans had turned their own primitiveness into the ultimate weapon, and they were wielding it with terrifying effectiveness. As he watched another Zephyrian ship succumb to a ramming attack, Vextar realized that everything he thought he knew about warfare, about civilization, about the natural order of the galaxy, was about to change forever. The humans had brought chaos to a universe that ran on order, and, somehow, impossibly, the chaos was winning. The orbital defense platforms of Zirion Prime had been designed by the finest Zephyrian engineers over centuries of refinement. Each installation was a masterwork of crystalline architecture, its weapons systems capable of precisely targeting threats across vast distances with quantum-assisted accuracy. Under normal circumstances, 7 primitive human vessels would have been vaporized before they could even approach the planet's outer atmosphere. But these were not normal circumstances. Admiral Vextar watched helplessly from the bridge of the Eternal Dominion as the human ships plowed through the defense grid like ancient battering rams breaking down a sophisticated electronic gate. The platforms fired, their brilliant energy beams lancing across space with deadly precision, but, without coordinated targeting protocols, they were forced to engage each ship individually. The first human vessel died in a spectacular explosion, its hull vaporizing under the concentrated fire of 3 orbital platforms. But the destruction served the human purpose perfectly, creating another massive electromagnetic pulse that disrupted nearby defensive systems and cleared a path for the remaining ships. 6 remaining vessels on approach vector, Commander Euthera reported, her voice tight with strain as she struggled to interpret the crude manual displays. Estimated impact with planetary surface in 14 minutes. Vextar opened a channel to the human fleet. Admiral Chen, you must listen to reason. What you're proposing will accomplish nothing except mutual destruction. Even if you contaminate our world, my fleet will still destroy every human ship in this system. Will you? Chen's response came immediately, and there was something almost conversational in her tone now, as if she were discussing weather patterns rather than the potential destruction of an entire world. Let's talk about that for a moment, Admiral. Another Zephyrian vessel exploded as a human ship rammed it, the primitive fusion reaction creating a burst of interference that temporarily blinded sensors across half the fleet. The remaining Zephyrian ships were trying to regroup, but, without their neural interface coordination, their movements were clumsy and uncoordinated. Your fleet consists of 47 vessels, Chen continued. Beautiful ships, perfectly designed, technologically superior in every measurable way. But, here's what your tactical analysis probably isn't telling you: we've destroyed or disabled 12 of your ships, and we started with only 27. Vextar checked the tactical display, and his blood chilled as he confirmed Chen's numbers. The exchange rate was unsustainable. At this pace, the human fleet would be completely destroyed, but they would take most of the Zephyrian task force with them. Our intelligence on your species was quite thorough, Admiral, Chen said. We know that Zephyrian naval doctrine emphasizes preservation of advanced technology and crew lives. You're not used to acceptable loss ratios, are you? Every ship you lose represents decades of construction time and hundreds of highly trained personnel. A 5th human ship reached the orbital defense perimeter, weaving between energy beams with reckless abandon. Its hull was already glowing from atmospheric friction as it began its descent toward the planet's surface. We also know, Chen added, that this fleet represents approximately 1/3 of your total deep space naval capacity. Losing it would be a strategic disaster for your empire, wouldn't it? Vextar realized with growing horror that Chen was right. The Zephyrians had become so accustomed to overwhelming technological superiority that they had never developed tactics for fighting an enemy willing to accept total destruction in exchange for inflicting maximum damage. Their entire military philosophy was based on efficient, elegant solutions that minimized casualties and preserved resources. So here's your tactical situation, Admiral, Chen continued, her voice now carrying an edge of grim satisfaction. You can continue this battle and probably destroy our entire fleet. But, by the time you finish us off, you'll have lost most of your ships, and at least one of our radioactive payloads will have reached your planet's surface. Zirian Prime will be uninhabitable, and you'll limp home with the survivors to explain to your government how you lost the most important world in your empire to a handful of primitive humans. The fourth human ship died under concentrated fire from 2 orbital platforms, but not before it released some kind of metallic chaff that further disrupted targeting systems.
The remaining ships continued their descent, now only minutes from impact.
Alternatively, Chen said, you can accept our terms and withdraw your fleet. In which case, we'll redirect our remaining ships and everyone goes home with their lives and their worlds intact.
What terms?
Vexstar asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Complete withdrawal of Zephyrian forces from all human-controlled systems.
Release of all human prisoners and research subjects. Formal recognition of human territorial sovereignty.
And a non-aggression pact that your government will actually honor this time. The terms were impossible, of course. They would require the Zephyrian Empire to abandon strategic resources, admit defeat to a primitive species, and restructure their entire approach to galactic expansion.
The political consequences alone would destabilize the government.
But the alternative was watching Zirian Prime become a radioactive wasteland while losing most of the deep space fleet in the process.
You're asking me to surrender, Vexstar said. I'm giving you an opportunity to survive, Chen corrected. There's a difference. On the tactical display, another human ship broke through the orbital defenses.
Its trajectory would take it directly into the largest population center on Zirian Prime's northern continent, where over 50 million Zephyrians lived in crystal cities that had stood for millennia.
Admiral, Commander Euthera said quietly, I'm receiving communications from the planetary surface.
The government is requesting clarification on our tactical situation. In other words, the civilian leadership was beginning to panic as they realized that their most protected world was under direct attack.
The political implications were staggering. No enemy had ever penetrated Zirian Prime's defenses, and the psychological impact on Zephyrian society would be devastating. How long until the first impact?
Vexstar asked.
7 minutes, sir.
7 minutes to make a decision that would define the future relationship between two species.
7 minutes to choose between military pride and practical survival.
Admiral Chen, Vexstar transmitted, suppose I were to consider your terms.
How do I know you'll honor them? How do I know this isn't simply a delaying tactic while more human ships prepare for additional attacks?
You don't, Chen replied bluntly. But here's what you do know, if we wanted to destroy your planet, we could have done it months ago. This attack required precise timing, extensive intelligence gathering, and the sacrifice of some of our best ships and crews. We didn't go to this trouble just to irradiate one world. She paused, and, when she continued, her voice carried a different quality. For the first time since the battle began, she sounded tired.
We want to coexist, Admiral.
We want to live in peace and develop our worlds without constantly looking over our shoulders for Zephyrian slave ships. But we've learned that the only language your empire understands is force, and we're prepared to speak that language as fluently as necessary.
Another human ship entered the atmosphere, its hull now trailing fire as it descended toward the surface.
The orbital platforms were still firing, but their effectiveness was severely limited by the ongoing electromagnetic interference. Sir, Subcommander Kaldos called out, I'm detecting energy signatures from the remaining human ships. They appear to be charging some kind of self-destruct mechanisms. Vexstar felt his heart skip several beats. If the humans were preparing to detonate their own ships, it suggested they were committed to this course of action regardless of the consequences. There would be no last-minute reprieve, no opportunity to negotiate once the first radioactive payload reached the surface. 5 minutes to impact, Commander Euthera reported.
The tactical display now showed the full scope of the disaster.
Even if the orbital platforms managed to destroy the remaining ships, the debris would still rain down on populated areas. The radiation exposure might be reduced, but it would still be enough to force massive evacuations and create long-term contamination zones. Admiral, came a new voice on the communication channel, speaking in perfect Zephyrian despite the obvious strain of exhaustion. This is Captain Maria Santos, commanding the human vessel Defiant.
I want you to understand something before you make your decision.
Vexstar recognized the tactical signature of the ship now approaching the planet's largest industrial center, where the Empire's most advanced manufacturing facilities produced the technology that maintained Zephyrian supremacy. My ship is carrying 47 tons of the most radioactive waste we could find, Santos continued. If I crash into those manufacturing plants, the contamination will spread through your industrial base and take centuries to clean up. Your technological advantage over every other species in the galaxy depends on what's built in those facilities. The implications were staggering. Losing Zirion Prime's industrial capacity would cripple the Empire's ability to maintain its military superiority. Other species, previously kept in check by Zephyrian technology, might see an opportunity to challenge their dominance. But, I also want you to know, Santos added, that I have a daughter back on Earth. She's 12 years old, and she loves to build crystal gardens in our backyard because she thinks they're beautiful. I'd rather see her grow up than die in a radioactive fireball, but I'll do what I have to do to give her a future free from Zephyrian slavery. The personal touch was devastating to Zephyrian psychology. Their species had evolved as highly social beings who valued family connections above almost everything else. The idea of a parent sacrificing themselves for their offspring resonated deeply with Zephyrian emotional programming.
3 minutes to impact, Commander Euthera announced.
Vexstar looked around his bridge at the faces of his officers. These were some of the finest military minds in the Empire, beings who had dedicated their lives to maintaining Zephyrian dominance across the galaxy. But, he could see in their expressions the same recognition that he felt. They were facing an enemy that couldn't be defeated through conventional means.
Open a channel to all Zephyrian vessels, he commanded. This is Admiral Vexstar.
All ships are to cease offensive operations immediately and withdraw to minimum safe distance.
Repeat, all ships are to disengage.
The bridge fell silent except for the humming of ship systems and the soft sounds of officers relaying orders to the fleet. Admiral Chen, Vexstar transmitted, I am prepared to discuss your terms.
The silence that followed Admiral Vexstar's transmission seemed to stretch across space itself.
On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, every officer held their breath as they waited for Admiral Chen's response. Through the viewing port, the human ships continued their descent toward Zirion Prime's surface, trails of fire marking their passage through the upper atmosphere like falling stars carrying death.
All human vessels, Chen's voice finally crackled through the communications system, this is Admiral Chen. Abort descent immediately. Repeat, abort descent and establish high orbit. Prepare for negotiation protocols.
The relief on the Zephyrian bridge was palpable, but Vexstar knew this was only the beginning of what would undoubtedly be the most significant diplomatic crisis in galactic history. He had just agreed to negotiate with a species that moments earlier had been prepared to contaminate an entire world to make their point. Captain Santos, Chen continued, status report.
Defiant asterisk is responding, came the strained voice of the human captain. Abort burn initiated.
We're pulling out of the gravity well, but it's going to be close.
My engines are running on emergency power after that electromagnetic pulse routine.
Vexstar watched the tactical display as the human ships slowly changed course, their primitive but apparently effective propulsion systems fighting against Zirion Prime's gravitational pull. Several ships were clearly struggling, their hulls glowing from atmospheric heating and their trajectories still dangerously steep. Commander Euthera, Vexstar ordered, dispatch rescue vessels to assist any human ships that are unable to achieve stable orbit. We cannot afford to have them crash accidentally after agreeing to negotiate. His officers exchanged glances at this unprecedented order, but they complied without question. Within minutes, Zephyrian rescue ships were moving to intercept the struggling human vessels, their advanced gravitational manipulation systems helping to pull them away from the planet's surface. Admiral Vexstar, Chen's voice returned, now carrying a more formal tone, I propose we conduct these negotiations aboard a neutral vessel.
I'm transmitting the coordinates of a derelict station in the outer system.
It should provide adequate facilities for both our species. The station she indicated was an old mining platform that had been abandoned decades earlier when the asteroid it orbited was exhausted. It would indeed be neutral ground, but Vexstar found himself wondering if this too was part of some larger human strategy.
Agreed, he replied. I will meet you there with a small diplomatic escort.
But, Admiral Chen, I want you to understand something clearly. I may have agreed to negotiate, but I have not surrendered. If these talks fail, or if I detect any sign of additional human forces preparing for attack, this ceasefire will end immediately.
Understood, Admiral. We'll both come with limited escorts and our weapons powered down.
This needs to be a conversation between soldiers, not a continuation of the battle by other means. 2 hours later, Vexstar found himself in the most surreal situation of his military career. The abandoned mining station's conference room had been hastily pressurized and heated to accommodate both species, creating an environment that was uncomfortably warm for Zephyrians but apparently just barely tolerable for humans. Admiral Sarah Chen was smaller than he had expected, her features worn by what humans called age but still carrying the sharp intelligence that had orchestrated the attack on his fleet. She was accompanied by 2 other humans, a tall, dark-skinned man introduced as General Marcus Webb, and a smaller woman whose cybernetic implants marked her as some kind of technical specialist. Before we begin, Chen said, settling into a chair that looked crude compared to Zephyrian furniture, I want to make something clear.
What happened today wasn't a victory for humanity.
It was a desperate gamble that could have gone catastrophically wrong. We lost 12 ships and over 3,000 people, proving a point that we hoped we'd never have to prove.
Vexstar studied the human admiral carefully.
Her directness was refreshing compared to the elaborate diplomatic protocols that typically governed interspecies negotiations, but it also made her more difficult to read.
And what point was that? He asked. That there are lines you cannot cross, General Webb answered.
Your empire has been treating human colonies like resource extraction sites and human beings like experimental subjects.
We tried diplomatic protests, economic sanctions, even targeted military actions against your forward bases. Nothing worked.
The technical specialist, introduced as Dr. Lisa Park, activated a holographic display that showed detailed intelligence on Zephyrian operations in human space. Vexstar was impressed despite himself by the thoroughness of their information gathering. 17 human colonies strip mine for rare earth elements, Dr. Park said, her voice clinical but underlaid with anger. Over 40,000 human civilians taken for biological research that we both know was simply curiosity about how primitive species function.
3 entire star systems declared off-limits to human settlement because they contained resources your empire wanted.
Those operations were conducted according to galactic law, Vexstar replied, though he felt less conviction in the statement than he would have that morning.
Galactic law is defined by the most powerful species in the galaxy, Chen corrected. Tell me, Admiral, when was the last time the Zephyrian Empire asked permission before claiming a star system? When did you last negotiate with a primitive species rather than simply taking what you wanted?
The question struck closer to home than Vexstar cared to admit. Zephyrian expansion had indeed followed a pattern of overwhelming technological superiority backed by the assumption that more advanced species had natural rights over less developed ones. Your point is taken, he said carefully. But surely you understand that what you did today changes everything. You've demonstrated that even primitive species can pose existential threats to advanced civilizations.
The implications are staggering. Are they?
Chen leaned forward in her chair, fixing Vexstar with an intense stare.
Or have we simply reminded everyone that the only real difference between primitive and advanced is how you choose to apply your resources?
She gestured to Dr. Park, who manipulated the holographic display to show technical readouts from the battle. Every piece of technology we use today was adapted from existing human systems, Dr. Park explained. Industrial power generators, communication jammers, even the nuclear waste we threatened your planet with.
None of it was beyond our current technological base. We just applied it in ways that your perfect technology couldn't handle. You turned your weakness into our weakness, Vexstar realized.
Exactly. Your crystal technology is incredibly sophisticated, but it's also incredibly specialized. It's designed to handle known threats, to operate within established parameters, to interact with familiar forms of energy and matter. What it's not designed for is chaos. General Webb activated another display, this one showing strategic projections. Every species you've conquered or intimidated has been trying to match your technological sophistication. They've been playing by your rules, trying to build better weapons and shields and ships.
But nobody ever asked the obvious question: what if we don't play by those rules at all? The implications were indeed staggering.
If humanity had demonstrated that primitive, brutal tactics could neutralize technological advantages, every suppressed species in the galaxy would be reconsidering their strategies for dealing with Zephyrian dominance.
"You've started a revolution," Vexstar said quietly.
"We've started a conversation," Shen corrected.
"The revolution will depend on what choices you make next."
She stood and moved to the station's viewing port, looking out at the assembled fleets. The human ships looked battered and crude compared to the elegant Zephyrian vessels, but they also looked dangerous in a way that transcended mere technological capability. "Admiral, your empire has ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years based on the assumption that technological superiority equals natural superiority. Today we proved that assumption wrong. The question now is whether you're smart enough to adapt."
"What exactly are you proposing?"
Vexstar asked.
"A new paradigm," General Webb answered. "Real coexistence instead of domination. Trade relationships instead of resource extraction. Mutual defense agreements instead of subjugation." "And if we refuse?"
Dr. Park's expression hardened. "Then, every species you've ever oppressed will know that Zephyrian supremacy can be challenged. They'll study our tactics, improve on our methods, and develop their own ways of turning your advantages against you. Within a decade, you'll be facing rebellions on dozens of worlds, all of them using variations on what we did today." Chen returned to her seat, but her posture remained alert and ready for action.
"But here's the thing, Admiral. We don't want to destroy your empire.
We want to transform it into something that can coexist with the rest of the galaxy without constantly threatening everyone else's existence. The political ramifications alone would destabilize our entire government," Vexstar protested.
"You're asking us to abandon the fundamental principles that have guided our civilization for millennia."
"We're asking you to evolve," Chen replied simply. "The same way every successful species has evolved when faced with changing circumstances. You can do it voluntarily, through negotiation and compromise, or you can do it involuntarily, through a series of increasingly costly conflicts with species that no longer fear your technological superiority." Vexstar found himself facing the most difficult decision of his career. Everything his species had achieved, everything their civilization represented, was built on the foundation of technological dominance over less advanced species. But the humans had just demonstrated that such dominance was far more fragile than anyone had realized.
"What guarantees can you offer?" he asked.
"How do I know that agreeing to your terms won't simply embolden other species to make even more extreme demands?"
"You don't," Chen admitted. "But consider the alternative.
If you refuse to negotiate with us, if you insist on maintaining the status quo through force, then every other species will conclude that negotiation is pointless. They'll skip straight to the kind of desperate tactics we use today." The conference room fell silent as both sides contemplated the implications. Outside, the two fleets maintained their positions, a fragile peace balanced on the edge of mutual annihilation.
Finally, Vexstar spoke. "I will need to consult with my government before making any formal agreements.
But I'm willing to establish a temporary ceasefire while negotiations continue." "That's all we're asking for right now," Chen replied. "A chance to prove that there's a better way forward for both our species." As they began discussing the practical details of the ceasefire, Vexstar realized that regardless of how these negotiations concluded, the galaxy had fundamentally changed. The age of unquestioned Zephyrian supremacy was ending, and something new was beginning to take its place. Whether that something would be better or worse remained to be seen. 6 months after the Battle of Zirion Prime, as historians had begun calling it, Admiral Vexstar stood once again on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion. But, this time, he was not preparing for war. Instead, he was overseeing the most unprecedented joint operation in galactic history, the first combined human-Zephyrian exploration mission to the unmapped regions beyond the galactic rim.
The changes had not come easily.
The negotiations that followed the ceasefire had taken months of delicate diplomacy, with both species learning to navigate the complex process of transforming enemies into allies. The Zephyrian government had initially resisted the proposed agreements, viewing them as capitulation to an inferior species. But, as reports of the battle spread throughout the galaxy, other subjugated civilizations had indeed begun questioning Zephyrian dominance. The Altarian Confederacy had been the first to rebel, using modified versions of human electromagnetic pulse tactics to disable Zephyrian patrol ships in their system. The Vegan Trade Union had followed within weeks, implementing a coordinated economic boycott that disrupted supply chains across 3 sectors. Most surprisingly, the ancient Crystalline Collective, long considered one of Zephyrian's most loyal client species, had formally requested renegotiation of their territorial agreements. Admiral, Commander Euthera reported, her voice carrying tones of genuine excitement rather than the formal reserve that had previously characterized their interactions. The human vessels are maintaining perfect formation with our fleet. Their navigation systems have integrated remarkably well with our guidance protocols. Through the viewing port, Vexstar could see the mixed fleet spreading out across space like a complex geometric pattern. Human ships, their angular hulls still bearing scars from hasty battlefield repairs, moved alongside pristine Zephyrian vessels in formations that would have been impossible just months earlier. The sight still struck him as surreal, but he had learned to find beauty in the unexpected. "Any word from Dr. Park's team?" he asked. "They report successful integration of human and Zephyrian scanning technologies. The hybrid sensor arrays are providing resolution capabilities that neither species could achieve independently." That had been one of the most surprising discoveries during the post-conflict negotiations. While Zephyrian technology was undeniably more advanced in most respects, human approaches to certain problems were refreshingly direct and, sometimes more effective than elegant Zephyrian solutions. The collaboration had begun producing innovations that neither species had anticipated. "Admiral Vexstar," came Admiral Chen's voice over the communication system, "we're approaching the target coordinates. Are your people ready for this?" Vexstar activated his own communication system, noting with mild amusement that he no longer wore the neural interface helmet that had once seemed essential for command operations. The human electromagnetic attack had taught him the value of maintaining skills that didn't depend on perfect technology. "We're prepared, Admiral Chen. All scanning stations report ready status." What they were attempting had never been tried before, a deep space exploration mission to investigate reports of ancient structures in the void between galaxies. The mission required the long-range capabilities of Zephyrian ships combined with the innovative problem-solving approaches that humans brought to unexpected challenges. "Initiating Combined Sensor Sweep, DR." Park announced from the human research vessel Discovery. Zephyrian quantum sensors are providing structural details, while human gravitational detectors are mapping mass distributions. "The integration is working better than we projected." The results appeared on displays throughout both fleets simultaneously, a testament to the communication protocols they had developed during months of cooperation. What they revealed defied the expectations of both species. By the Crystal Gardens, Sub-Commander Keldos whispered, his usual formal composure forgotten in the face of what the sensors were showing them. The structures were enormous, clearly artificial, and obviously ancient beyond anything in recorded galactic history. They stretched across millions of kilometers of empty space in geometric patterns that suggested intelligence, but of a kind that neither humans nor Zephyrians had ever encountered. "Admiral," Chen's voice carried a note of awe that Vexstar had never heard from the normally pragmatic human commander, "are you seeing this? These constructs appear to predate both our civilizations by millions of years. The quantum resonance patterns are unlike anything in our databases," Commander Euthera added. Whatever species built these structures, they were using principles of physics that we're only beginning to understand. Vexstar found himself experiencing something he had not felt in decades, genuine intellectual curiosity combined with appropriate humility. The structures before them made both human and Zephyrian technological achievements seem insignificant by comparison. "Dr. Park," he transmitted, "what are your preliminary conclusions about the builders of these constructs?" "It's too early for definitive analysis, Admiral, but the scale and complexity suggest a civilization that transcended the kind of limitations both our species are still working within. They weren't just technologically advanced, they were operating on completely different assumptions about what was possible." General Webb's voice joined the conversation from the human command ship.
The tactical implications are staggering. If there were species this advanced in the past, it raises questions about why they disappeared and whether they might still exist somewhere. More immediately, Chen added, it provides perspective on our recent conflicts. Here we were, two species fighting over territorial disputes and resource allocation, when there are clearly mysteries in the universe that dwarf our petty concerns. The comment struck home for Vextar. The battle 6 months ago had seemed like a pivotal moment in galactic history, but, in the context of these ancient structures, both human and Zephyrian civilizations appeared to be taking their first tentative steps into a much larger and more complex universe. Admiral Chen, he said, I propose we establish a permanent joint research station here. This discovery is too important to be claimed by any single species. Agreed. And, Admiral, I think this proves something we discovered during our negotiations: we accomplish far more working together than we ever did working against each other. As the combined fleet began deploying research equipment and establishing preliminary survey patterns, Vextar reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had led to this moment. 6 months ago, he had been a proud military commander defending the superiority of his civilization against primitive upstarts. Today, he was a co-explorer venturing into mysteries that neither species could have uncovered alone. The transformation hadn't been without costs. Several Zephyrian colonies had experienced civil unrest as traditional power structures were challenged. Some human factions had opposed cooperation with former oppressors, preferring to press their military advantage while they held it. Both species had been forced to confront uncomfortable truths about their assumptions and prejudices. But they had also discovered capabilities they had never suspected. Zephyrian precision combined with human adaptability was proving remarkably effective. Human resourcefulness enhanced by Zephyrian technology was opening entirely new approaches to exploration and discovery. Most surprisingly, the cultural exchange was enriching both civilizations in ways that neither had anticipated. Sir, Commander Euthera reported, we're receiving a priority transmission from the Galactic Council. They're requesting a joint briefing on our discoveries here. The Galactic Council had been restructured following the events at Zirion Prime, evolving from a Zephyrian-dominated administrative body into a more representative organization where multiple species held real decision-making power. It wasn't perfect, but it was a significant improvement over the previous system. Schedule the briefing for next week, Vextar replied. And, make sure both Admiral Chen and Dr. Park are available to participate. This discovery belongs to all of galactic civilization, not just our two species. As he gave the order, Vextar realized how natural it had become to think in terms of shared achievements rather than competitive advantages. The human attack on Zirion Prime had indeed changed everything, but not in the way anyone had expected. Instead of destroying Zephyrian civilization, it had forced both species to evolve beyond their limitations. Admiral Vextar, Chen's voice returned to the communication system, I wanted to thank you for something. 6 months ago, you made a choice that saved both our civilizations from a catastrophic war. History will remember that decision. Admiral Chen, 6 months ago you taught me that strength doesn't come from technological superiority or military dominance. It comes from the courage to change when change is necessary. That may be the most valuable lesson our species has ever learned. The ancient structures continued to rotate slowly in the void, their purpose still unknown but their message clear: the universe was vast, mysterious, and full of wonders that could only be explored through cooperation rather than conquest. As both fleets settled into their research patterns, beginning the long process of unlocking secrets that had waited millions of years for discovery, Vextar felt a profound sense of satisfaction. The officers who had once laughed at human primitiveness had learned to respect human innovation. The humans who had faced annihilation had found allies instead of conquerors. And, somewhere in the depths of space, ancient mysteries waited to teach both species just how much they still had to learn about the universe and their place in it. The age of Zephyrian dominance had ended not with destruction, but with transformation. The age of galactic cooperation had begun, and the possibilities were as infinite as the stars themselves.